let me start sharing my screen. Give me a sec. There we go. So today we're going to chat a little bit about abstracts and titles. And I threw titles in there because I don't know about you, but when I'm working on my, usually when I'm, so let me backtrack. So we went through in the previous workshops we went through all the different sections for a research article. And once you have your manuscript in a decent shape, I think that's a really good time to start thinking about really polishing your abstract and also polishing your title. You have, and I know that you all have already titles for your projects, but those titles might not always be the spiffiest one. And by spiffy, I mean the ones that will grab your reader's attention the best in the journal that you're selecting. So I do want to talk about some strategies to work on that as well, because I think title and abstract go hand in hand, because those are the two things that all of your readers will definitely read. They might read other parts, and hopefully they will, but abstract, and if you think about the way that you select articles, as certainly I do, I look at titles, of course, abstracts. So let's take a look at those together while I go on my slideshow mode. Let me change my display settings. So abstract. So let's start with, I will talk a little bit about conference abstracts, but I only have like one slide in there, and I'm just going to show it to you because I know that many of you also go, present at conferences. And there's a really great resource that helps, I think, with thinking about conference abstracts, which are a little bit different than abstract for title. And the last piece right here, the editing principles, we probably won't get to too much, which is okay, because we will focus on them in the next workshops with me. Most of them will focus on editing, or I like to call them science writing principles. And especially as you are now starting to either write your, carry out your research, start writing up your methods results. Some of you already might be in the throes of writing a discussion section, introduction section. Those I think can be very useful for those as well. And we'll go over them in greater detail, but they are really useful to use when you're working on an abstract that has a limited amount of space. Like the entire article has a limitation. There's always a word limit or length limit. But the abstract is very short, with 250 words on average, maybe 300 if you get lucky. But so you have pack a lot in there that you want your reader to get a good idea of your work. So we'll look at some strategies. At least I'll mention them today, but we'll probably go into depth into them later. So we're looking at some different types of abstract and some of these principles about best abstract and title writing, and again, some of the revision principles. I was trying to be very organized here with learning outcomes. Doesn't necessarily always happen, but it happened with this workshop, just to give you an idea where we're going. Let me clear the markings and continue here. Yeah. There we go. So let's talk about titles a little bit. So elements of an effective title, and this comes mostly from a lot of writing from colleagues of mine focusing on scientific writing, right, which is really where all of you are located. Common length is between 10 to 15 words. In my disciplines, and sometimes if you work more in the interdisciplinary area with social sciences or humanities, titles can get a lot longer. I mean, in my field, 15 words are like nothing, which can be a little bit annoying because who has time to read like a 30 word title? It's a lot to absorb. So we're really focusing on 10 to 15 words. Some titles can have two parts, like with a colon or a dash, like a subtitle. And I like to do that. That's sort of my style of writing titles for my work, which makes them usually lengthier. So this is something to watch out for. But depending on the complexity of your work, it might be useful to do that. Again, it's a case-to-case basis. What really the title should do, as you all know, summarize the main idea of the paper, capture the main elements of the study. So I should walk away from your title, not have an in-depth knowledge of your methodology, but maybe have an inkling of what your paper, the framework for your paper. And this is my pet peeve, like avoid abbreviations in titles. There's nothing, or if you use an abbreviation, you have to write it out first. A lot of people try to save space by using abbreviations, but if you're really risking your readers not really fully getting what you mean and kind of glancing over your paper rather than finding it interesting to read. And abbreviations and abstracts follows a similar kind of similar kind of advice. Try to avoid abbreviations as much as possible in abstract. If you have to use them, you have to write them out first. And then, in your main text, you can do different things. But in the abstract, it can be very distracting. I find a lot of folks are trying to find a certain play with words or catchiness in their title, which is great if you have a talent for that. I know that I don't. I know a lot of titles that are catchy, but they're also, but you're risking with catchiness sometimes losing a certain audience, because often catchiness in a title, like something that's a wordplay or play with a sort of, maybe popular culture kind of thing, really can vary across audiences, and you're writing for a broad audience. So be aware of that. So for example, I want to show this one to you: carbon monoxide, to boldly go where where NO has gone before. It's catchy because it plays on, if some of you are familiar maybe with Star Trek. Is it Star Trek? Yeah, it's Star Trek. It was Star Trek or Star Wars. But if you're not familiar with the series Star Trek, this means nothing. And you're like, what does this mean, boldly go before? It's the opening statement of each Star Trek episode, whatever, something going before. I don't even know the original. I just know it comes from
boldly go where no man has gone before.
There you go, Jeanette, a Trekkie. Thank you. I was like, how does this go? And it's Gene Roddenberry's voice or his wife's voice, right? So it's very dependent on a cultural context. Or ashes to ashes, terminal contact burns and children caused by recreational fires. Ashes to ashes is a phrase that is used in English at funerals, at Christian funerals. So it's kind of a little macabre even, like, really, especially with pediatrics, like, come on. So again, to play with words can cost you might sacrifice losing some audience members with that by either understanding, by being turned off. So it's something that, if it's very important to you, take a risk with, you just be aware of that. And this is really important, and we're going to look at this in many examples, both here for titles and then when we go to the abstracts, is if you have certain keywords, like the main, I think Asma, could you mute your microphone? I think we're hearing some background voice from you. Thank you, it's good to have you. So use the same keywords in the title that are your main keywords that you also use throughout the abstract, ideally throughout the paper. If that connection isn't there, you really lose coherence. And this suggestions come from this article, Scientists, Silly, Dark, and Sometimes Inappropriate Humor. Take a look at the link. You have the slides. There's some really other fun examples and just some outrageous examples of really titles that are trying to do a little bit too much. So if you want to have a little chuckle, check it out. I do want to mention, I want to put this out here. This is from the APA style manual, and the APA stands for, and here I'm using an acronym, so I'm not following my own suggestions. APA stands for the American Psychological Association, which is a citation style that's widely used in the social sciences, and even some science journals use APA. Harvard style is another style that's very similar to APA that I see sometimes used in public health. It's the style with parenthetical citation. So the AMA, the American Medical Association, is the one that many people use in the sciences with numbers. This one is parenthetical, but the APA manual has some great suggestions for titles. And here are some examples of effective titles, ineffective titles, and then some rationale. So really, cutting unnecessary words. If you look at the first example, rather than a study of the effect of depression on the decision to join a clinical trial. This is more an ineffective title, hierarchy and team effectiveness. I'm like, okay, in what context? You need a little bit more, it's short, I give you that, it's 4 words, but I don't know what the heck is going on in the study, right? And then the last one, closing your eyes to follow your heart. I'm like, is this a romance novel? What's going on here, right? It's a little bit too creative. So it gives you sort of just to show you that balance between, being as informative and effective as possible from the APA style. So there's a 5-step approach that I've taken from this article that I really like, and I'd encourage you to do on your own later on or at some point as you're working on your paper. So you want to ask yourself these questions, like, what's my paper about? What techniques, designs were used? Who or what is studies? And what were the results? Right? And so here is just some example. My paper studies whether X therapy improves the cognitive function, randomized trial, 40 cases, improvement in the cognitive function of patients, right? So very straightforward what the article is about. So then and then the second step is, so take from these answers you have, look at the keywords in there. And the keywords Work X therapy, randomized trial, dementia, 6 Japanese cities, 40 cases, improved cognitive function. And then you can take these keywords to create a sentence that includes the words you listed. So it could be a long sentence. So the sentence is here: the study is a randomized trial that investigates whether X therapy improved cognitive function for dementia patients, blah, blah, blah. And it's 28 words, which is far too long for a title. But here then you can start taking out the unnecessary words. So for example, this study is, you don't need a full sentence with a verb and a subject for a title. You don't have to do that. So cutting out all the sort of repetitive or unnecessary words or linking, and then linking the remaining, should end up with the title: Randomized Trial of X Therapy for Improving Cognitive Function in 40 Dementia Patients from 6 cities in Japan. I would argue the 6 cities you might be able to take out as well and just focus on Japan, unless that's really important to you, you emphasize that 6 cities. But in the title, I think that might be too much detail. So, and then ultimately you can delete non-essential information. I personally think mentioning Japan in the title is interesting. I often find that US authors don't tend to write in their titles that it's based in the US, and it drives me crazy, especially when writing for a broad audience. But again, I think that mentioning it in the title helps your readers understand where your study is coming from. Jeanette, your hand is up. Go ahead.
Yes, thanks. I was just wondering if we always must put the method in the title. So for example, here, randomized trial.
That's a great question, Jeanette. And I actually don't think so. I think integrating it, if it's because sometimes you have a complex study that's a blah, 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 and this and this and this, and that's already taking up 10 words or 8 words. So, so you might want to think about, is there a way to say, to find a more overarching word? Personally, from a reader's perspective, I think it helps, because I don't know right away in the title, but sometimes other pieces are more important than the methodology, and that might not be in there. So this is kind of a case-to-case basis. If you can, I would say yes, include it. But if that makes your title go from 15 words to like 23, you might want to, think about having a shorter title that might be informative enough about the context of the study without necessarily mentioning the methodology. Henry, any thoughts on that?
Well, I think if it doesn't involve a lot of words, I would mention a randomized trial. I mean, one or two extra words gives out a lot of information. Just like we often put down a qualitative study or a pilot study. It just gives a little bit more information.
I agree. And so if you do a mixed method study, that might be the only thing you put in there. So just give your readers some inclination of where this is coming from. Because I might read, I'm like, wow, this sounds great. And then I read the abstract, or, and then I realize halfway reading the article, this is not a study design that's interesting to me. And, and I could have avoided that from the beginning. Or I might have been like, this doesn't sound like it's something. And I'm looking for, let's say, qualitative studies, but it sounds like a quantitative study to me. And I might just glimpse over it just in a title search. So you're ensuring, by being the more accurate you can be in your title, you're ensuring to get the right readers for your work.
And it certainly helps if you're doing a review or something.
Yes.
It'll help to see that in the title.
Certainly does. Thank you. I know. I've been working with colleagues of mine on a sort of scoping review, and it's going to end up probably narrative concept review of like scientific writing and how scientific writing is taught in higher education, just looking at journal articles. And I have to say, I've learned a whole new appreciation for people who write exact titles, and especially really effective abstracts. Because can I tell you that a lot of people don't? And it's infuriating. It makes also searching for articles very difficult. So if you're really clear on your keywords and your terms, it makes searching for your work. It ensures that your work will come up in any searches relevant, for people. You want people to see your work. So here are some examples: a randomized trial of X therapy. This one right here. There we go. Blah, 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 or X therapy improves cognitive function for the dementia patients, a randomized trial, right? So you have the subtitle here with the colon. So either one of those, it's 13 versus 12 words. I kind of like I mean, I like the colon and the subtitles, but this is kind of a short subtitle. I'm like, whatever. So again, in my discipline, we tend to be a lot longer with this. I really like this because it's really straightforward, but this does the same thing. So it's really a preference of style at this point. So Isabel May's preference is this, but it doesn't mean that somebody else thinks this is better. So, so that I want to make sure this is not one is better than the other. It's just my personal preference, and you might have a different preference. And I might have a different preference any other given day. Who knows, right? So right now, I feel this title is a little more to the point. So let me see where we're going to go next. So here's some practice. We're not going to go into that. We have some time at the end. We might do this. I might put up a discussion board on the Moodle, and we can take a look at these. But we'll take a look at these later. So, actually, let me do this. I'm just going to give you the answers here. So this is from an article from the Disorder Journal of Anesthesia, which I thought was by Tulu, really interesting paper that analyzes titles and abstract for research papers and gives the advice that we all know we should do, being concise, precise, and meticulous. So how do you do that? So here are some examples of I think from the authors, from their own work, from different titles. So you see this one, for example, and you can take a look at these in greater detail later. And I might throw some more of these up on the discussion board. This one here, I'm talking about right now. It's very short, right? And it has the abbreviation in here. And I like this note here. HIV is maybe an abbreviation that is very commonly used. So I would also say like DNA, for example. DNA or HIV are abbreviations you might not have to write out because they're very common, they're common usage. But anything but those, I would always encourage to write out your abbreviations in the titles. And so this one here is sort of the optimum number of words, population intervention are mentioned. And you see this one here, clinical profile, blah, 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 doesn't mention the genetic, doesn't mention the study design. So, it doesn't, it would be helpful if it were in there, but again, it's not in there and it still gives a good idea. I think most of these articles, I think this one wasn't, most of the others were published if I remember correctly, but it gives you an idea of some variety of titles that the author here sort of analyzed their own titles, what they thought was well done and wasn't. So just wanted to share that with you. Okay, so any questions about titles? Nothing. Could put it in the chat as well if you can't talk. Let me see if there's anything in there.
Could it be a question? Could it be in the form of a question? I guess not. Maybe a proposal title could be in the form of a question, but after you've done the research and you've got the results.
Yeah, I wouldn't put it in the questions. Even for a proposal, I mean, you could, I think it's more effective to write like this proposal asks the following question or these questions rather than a title, because it's kind of like almost like a rhetorical question. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of using questions unless you're actually writing about these are the questions we're asking. So, but I agree with you, Jeanette, for a proposal, for more preliminary work, the question format might be an option for a title, maybe for a conference, because it could, create some interest. But I would always prefer a more straightforward approach to a title, because I think it also shows, I don't know, again, that's my personal preference. I've seen question format in conference presentations, and I've done it myself. But beyond that genre, I would recommend not doing that. It's a good question, though, Jeanette. Haha, no pun intended. Question about a question. Okay, sorry, I'm going on a tangent here. So again, take a look at this. Let me go over the conference presentation in a second. Take a look at this article here, the Rajagopalan article from it's from Editage Insights. Editage, again, it's a for-profit editing company, but again, it has some useful information on there. So I encourage you to take a look at this one. Let me go back to the presentation. I have one quick slide here about conference abstracts, because conference abstracts are a little bit different than abstracts from manuscripts. Another really good article here to look at, just summarized for you. Some main parts to include in your abstract: current state of knowledge in your field, what's wrong with the status quo, knowledge gap, similar to what you do in an article abstract. Offer a solution, suggest what to do about it, describe the resolution. So similar to an abstract for paper, but maybe less formalized, and you usually have a little bit more words. Okay. So my child is crying in the back here. Hold on 1 second. Give me just 1 second. What's this much? You want to say hello to everybody? I think my kid wants to say hello to you all, so bear with me. Hi, everybody. This is Tommy. Can you go to daycare with Daddy? No. Oh, yes. What do you want? Oh, okay. I need to go off camera for a second, but I'll continue the presentation. Give me a sec.
Okay.
There we go. The joys of being a mother. So, okay, let me go.
That's right. Everyone show now their children.
Oh, excellent. Look, there's another baby. There's another baby. Come here. Okay. So again, just a quick slide on conference abstract. Just wanted to throw it in there. Take a look at the article. I like the sort of, the question approach for a conference abstract. So I wanted to share that with you. Give me a second. I'm going to try to double multitask here. So manuscript abstract. So this is from an article. Remember the article series I've been sharing with you a lot from clinical chemistry from Thomas Ainsley. This is the article. He has an article, of course, on the on abstract as well. And he compares it to an elevator talk. An elevator talk or elevator pitch. You might be familiar with the term, but I do want to explain it in case you aren't. It's a term that's used a lot here in the US or in English-speaking contexts for like a business pitch. It's basically the idea that if you want to sell your idea to a CEO or somebody whom you want money from or support from for your project, you have an elevator ride with that person. And an elevator ride is, again, in the context of US or North American sort of buildings, can be 13 floors, 25 floors. You maybe have 30 seconds to 60 seconds for an elevator pitch. So the idea is that an abstract is similar, right? What does it take you to read an abstract? A minute and a half. So you have that short amount of time to convince somebody of the merit of your work. Again, elevator pitch or elevator talk is a very sort of business approach and very sort of mercantilistic in the sense of like, I need funding for my project. But in a way for us, for researchers, it's kind of similar, right? Like we want, funding, of course, for grant proposals, but we want to see our work be published and shared. So Ainsley compares it to this elevator talk. And here are sort of, the table, just the main characteristics of a well-written abstract: stands on its own, states the hypothesis, objective, completes the story, answers the hypothesis. So it gives an idea of the main result, contains the same keywords and terms as the title and the introduction. I cannot emphasize this enough. I've worked with so many writers that try to be creative and find synonyms for terms that don't need and shouldn't need synonyms. Like the main concepts in their paper, use the same word. Repetition is okay. So if your paper is about, and I'm going to use this a great example here, but if your paper is about, a defibrillator in some context, use that word over and over. You don't have to find a synonym for, defibrillator or something like that. It's not the greatest example, but I hope you catch my meaning here. But these and I'll show you again, when we look at the examples for the abstracts that I've selected, you'll see clearly how well these abstracts do that in terms of using the same keywords and terms. Correct style and format, that's determined usually by the journal, so make sure you're aware of that. And it follows the same order. So you have a piece of the intro, method, results, and discussion, right? So it's almost like a shortened version of it's like a abbreviated version of your entire article following the same structure. Make sure you have the word count. Don't include anything in there that might not be in the paper. Spätzchen, kannst du das bitte loslassen hier? Sorry, my kid might mute me by accident. It has happened before. So let me take the button away from him. Limit the use of abbreviations. And this is important. You don't need to include references in your abstract. And that's that really can, well, for many of you, you're using AMA, the American Medical Association numerical version, but for those of you using parenthetical citations, that can really cut down in terms of numbers of words. And you also don't cite any tables of figures, right? So really the abstract stands by itself without having to refer to anything else. So that was a quick overview of this. My quick summary of that. I think what I really always like to emphasize is this last one. It's the most read part of any article. So we should spend some time on this. It really is the gateway to get other folks interested in your work. And you want to make sure that your abstract presents your work in a way that others who are interested in this kind of work will understand that your work is relevant for them. It increases your chances of being cited once you publish your work if your abstract is really accurate. And again, having gone through this or going through this experience with the scoping review, I wish that, abstract writing would really get a lot more attention in the scientific community. So hence we're doing this with you. So let's, again, just the structure I mentioned, it follows the IMRED structure. So you have something from the intro, hypothesis, what's the experiment, key finding, conclusion. And if there's some implication, you can include it here as well. But really 5 and 6 are often the same, right? But those are really the main points. There is a comment. Let me see. My manuscript also presented in a conference. Oh, Elvis, that's a really good. No, it actually, Elvis, not necessarily. It all depends on. It sounds like you're gonna present the same thing, the same, your results that you're writing in your manuscript. So your abstract and your title will probably be the same. They don't have to be different. What often happens is when, at least it happens to me a lot, I'm working on a project and I might write a conference abstract. Before I maybe do, maybe even start doing my data collection, I submit something to a conference. So my conference abstract will probably be a little different than ultimately when my manuscript is finished. But if your manuscript is finished and you're presenting about it at a conference, there probably is a lot of overlap and similarity. I hope that answers your questions, Alice. You good, babe? Hold on. My kid is requesting something. So let me get out of this here so you can see this. Oh, sorry, I have to shift this baby. Well, I'm not a baby anymore, really. There's another. Okay, great. Thanks, Alice. So let me continue with the slides here. I do want to say something about different types of abstracts. There's a simple conventional style and a structured format, and I'll show you examples for this as well. And there's also 2 styles, descriptive and informative. Most of you will use the descriptive style. No, the informative style, because descriptive, I'll show you an example of what they are, but those are in the world of abstracts, the different types, different formats, and different styles. So here's an example of an article from environmental research, pharmaceuticals, herbicides, and disinfectant agricultural water sources. So very general title, but I wanted to point out it's 227 words. So the title is on the bottom. It's about pharmaceuticals, herbicides, and disinfectants in agricultural water sources. And I highlighted in each throughout this abstract. And I want to show you how the authors are continuing to use the same keywords, right? That's what I mentioned earlier. It starts off with agricultural water. It mentions agricultural water actually 3 different times in the first, 3 lines. And this is where sometimes I get people saying like, oh, it sounds so repetitive. It's all about agricultural water. I'm like, yes, and it needs to be about agricultural water because that is the topic of the paper. So agricultural water should be a term that is used a lot in the abstract and the introduction. It also picks up the pharmaceuticals, herbicides, disinfectants, right? A couple of times, herbicides twice, and the rest once. So it really gives that coherence between the title and the abstract that's really important. And so here, this first part is the background. So the background sometimes in an abstract can be up to 2, maybe 3 sentences. It shouldn't be longer than 3, right? So here I think it is 3 sentences. I've seen abstracts where the sentence on the background, like basically the introduction without the hypothesis, is maybe 1 sentence, okay? But up to 3, I would say, and 3 sentences, not super long sentences either. Then you have here the research question and methodology kind of, together and write one after the other. So we did this and we found this. Like Tommy's making some comments here on the presentation, so he wants it bigger. But anyways, sorry about that. If you hear it, it picks up on my microphone. So research question methodology might have a sentence on each, right? Or maybe two, depending on how complex your study is. But it shouldn't really be much more than that. And then the most likely, the longest part in your abstract, where you might use maybe even up to 4 sentences, might be or will most likely be your results, right? And that should really drive your abstracts. Like, what is it that you found? And sometimes it might be only a sentence or two, because you're able to present your main finding, your main result in a short, in a short way, or in a short form. But this is really, I find in most abstracts, this part is the longest, and rightfully so, because that's, as a reader, what I'm most interested in. Like, oh, you did this. Well, what did you find? And then, of course, I can read more about it in your article. Let me see, there's a question in the chat. How about the paragraph in the abstract? Oh, Siti, are you asking about sort of paragraph transitions and or having several paragraphs in the abstract? You can either unmute yourself or type it in, whatever you prefer.
Yes, please.
So I would want it. So an abstract is usually 1 paragraph, right? So you don't have to really worry so much about in between sentence transitions as you would in your intro and discussion section, because it really is basically, this is the problem. This is what we want to do. This is what we did. This is what we're asking. Here are results. Here are implications. So it can be a little bit choppy, and that's okay. So what I usually emphasize with paragraphs doesn't apply so much for the abstract, because it really is about making sure the information is there. Does that make sense? Does it answer your question?
Yeah. Thank you, Isabel.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Anytime. And then the last part here is on the results. So further studies are needed to evaluate, blah, blah. And it's only 1 sentence. That's it. Like, this is what we found. And of course, there's a whole lot more to unpack behind this. And I find that's always the tricky part in writing an abstract, to really think about what is the most important information. That might be particularly difficult to do for the results section, especially if you have a lot of really interesting results. You really got to focus on what's the main result that will draw your reader in, that really gives the best representation of the impact of your study. And the result doesn't have to be, we were able to prove our hypothesis. It could be, something you might have found something, wherever your work took you, right? So, but it's the main result and the main answer to your research question, basically. Okay, so conclusion implications here. Let me show you another example. So this is from this article, Emerging Microbial Biocontrol Strategies for Plant Pathogens. Again, I highlighted here the key terms, and see how often these key terms are repeated in the abstract: biological control, microbes, biocontrol microbes, plant pathogens, biocontrol. I think I might have made a mistake here with using biocontrol twice, but the key terms, again, are repeated very frequently in this abstract, which is 216 words. So it's a little bit shorter than the previous one. And again, you see this abstract, and it's actually one for a review article. So this is an interesting one, because it doesn't follow necessarily the IMRAD principle, because there isn't really a methods and results section. So in this, and I know I think one of you is working on a systematic review, which is a little different. An abstract for systematic review focuses very similar on the IMRAD structure that a systematic review focuses on as well. But for a review article, you will spend more time in your abstract presenting the context of the study, and then just really kind of your research question, so to speak, like your review focus is in 1 sentence only, a small part after a larger part on the context. And then the last part, the last couple of sentences really focus on sort of an overview of what the research literature on this topic shows. So it's a little different of a format for review, for an abstract for review article, and then for a traditional research article that most of you are writing. Okay, so this is This is what we call a descriptive abstract. Remember, I mentioned before there's informative and descriptive. This is a descriptive abstract because it really, mostly because it's for a review article, and that's usually the format used for review articles, where you don't go into detail in terms of informative, but you really mirror the passages, the parts of your research article. So the earlier one was an informative abstract. Let me go back to this one here. This one was an informative abstract where really it's focused on synthesizing information from all four parts of your research article. Okay. So here is a structure, and this is, and they were all not structured, meaning that they were just basically a paragraph. A structured abstract looked something like this. You'll see these, and the big difference here is only really those headings, where you structure it for your readers. And this is actually depends mostly on the journal. Some journals want the abstracts to be structured, and some journals don't. And so that's really the big secret here. This is not like, oh my God, what am I going to do? You just basically plop the description for each part in front of the text that you've written in your abstract. You could take these out and would have a unstructured informative abstract, right?
Mama, this is going to get ugly real quick. So if you pause it for a second, help me kick it out because he doesn't want to go to keep it.
Okay.
And if I grab him right now, he's going to.
Sorry, guys. I might need to pause here for a second.
Just taking the Kita later.
Okay, I'll take it to Kita later. Okay. Can you go with Daddy, Spätzchen? No, you want to stay with Mommy? Okay, stay here. All right, folks. Sorry about that. We're having a little bit of a separation anxiety here. So again, structured informative abstract. And so the structured piece, the difference is having those headings, right? Those headings for the different parts in your abstract. That's really the only difference here. And, you know, and it really it depends on the journal. There is no right or wrong with this. Some journals want it this way, some journals don't. Another descriptive abstract here is from Science. And you notice that it's a lot shorter. So descriptive abstracts, just similar to descriptive abstract for the review article, tend to be shorter and really don't go into detail in terms of, don't necessarily follow the detailed structure of methods, of introduction method or background methods, results, and discussion. And I don't see them used a lot in most research journals. Science might be a difference because it publishes articles that are written for a more broader audience. And so they tend to be more narrative and focus more on the story rather than the details in terms of methods. So almost all of you will use a informative abstract format mirroring the IMRAD structure, and either using a structured or an unstructured format depending on the journal you're publishing it. Okay, but I wanted to show an example of a descriptive one as well to you here. Sorry, this was a little disruptive with my kid being here, but any questions, thoughts, comments? Oh, there's something in the chat. Let me check. The headings give guidance in both reading. Absolutely. And you know what, Elvis, honestly, if you, I think that's actually a great idea to use them for your draft. And if the journal you're submitting to doesn't want them, you just take them out. I mean, it's as simple as that. You take them out. And if the journal wants them and you didn't have them in there, you just put them in. Jeanette, your hand was up. You didn't put it down. Is it a question?
Yeah, I just noticed that is it this one? Yeah, the descriptive abstract is on the screen as a reference in it. Does that normally, we don't normally include references, do we? Yeah, Norman et al.
Where is the Norman et al? Yes, you're absolutely right. It has in. You know, I mean, I have seen references in abstracts. Yeah, they're probably more in descriptive abstracts because they're shorter. Because if you're working against 250 words for an informative abstract, these two, let me see my annotation. These 3 words could really send you over the edge. So, and I've also, for full disclosure, I've seen informative abstract that also have citations. They're just not necessary. And most I think most editors and reviewers would not make a comment like, oh my God, this author didn't cite anything in their abstract, because it is more common to not cite. But good catch, Jeanette. Yeah. So again, it is not that you, and if it's really like this, I don't know, if you're writing about DNA and your I don't know, your work suddenly, which is probably what, but you know, which it'll change the way we look at Watson and Crick's work, then you probably want to mention those two, right? Because they're sort of the founders of DNA, kind of, you know, DNA science and genetics. But otherwise, if it's just an article, you don't have to cite it, is what I'm trying to say. You don't have to do the reference. I hope that answers your question, Jeanette. Your hand is up.
This looked unusual to me because I guess I'm accustomed to looking more at informative abstracts.
You're absolutely right, Jeanette. And many descriptive abstracts might not have them either, but you probably will see them more in descriptive abstracts than in informative abstracts. You're absolutely right about that.
Okay, thanks. Good to know.
You're welcome. Nita?
Yes. Sometimes when I read article, I observe in some abstracts, I used to see introduction, few lines of introduction. Sometimes there is no few lines of introduction, only objective. Sometimes only rational is written in the start. So this is unclear to me what we need to write in introduction or objective or rational.
That's a really good point, Nita, and I've seen that too. I always think, so let's say your objective is, and I'm going to give a very general example. Let's say your objective is to analyze a particular drug, a pharmaceutical intervention for reducing breast cancer incidence. I so relate, Nita. Reducing breast cancer incidence. And you might want to, the abstract would start off with like our objective, or this article, so this research project's objective was to blah, 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 to look at, to examine yada, yada. But it might be helpful. And so the introduction section of the article might go into like, hey, there are different pharmaceutical interventions for reducing the incidence of breast cancer. We're looking, the reason why we look at this one is because this one hasn't really studied fully and not as much as the others. So it might be useful to have a sentence in the abstract saying, many pharmaceutical interventions have been studied to reduce the incidence of breast cancer rates. However, not too much has been written on this particular drug, and we're focusing on this drug, right? So it gives more of a narrative structure to your abstract. But that sentence about like, there's other drugs that exist that also have been studied about incidence of breast cancer rates. That might not everybody puts those phrases in there. I think it's a good idea. Because it creates context for the reader of your abstract. Not everybody might know that there are many, and it just creates a better flow, I think, for your abstract as well. But you might also be able to put this into objective. So you could say, our project objective was to study this drug because other drugs have been studied a lot more than ours. And that's not the greatest writing you want to use, but just to get you the idea. I hope that helps you. Do you have a follow-up question, Nita? Go ahead. Is your hand still up? Go ahead.
I have one more question. In case if I have long methodology of my proposal or any, how to briefly describe methodology in abstract section? It would be very difficult. Sometimes it is very difficult for us to explain methodology in abstract session.
So is it because your methodology is so complex?
So complex and long and very connective to another sentence. Means if I write half methodology, so it will not be representable. It is a long methodology. So do we need to explain methodology in abstract session? It's hard. We might need to have to look at your work individually. And if you have a particular question, send me what you have, and I'll be happy to give you an insight on what the abstract version might look like. My general answer is that it is possible
to write about even the most complex methodology in a sentence or two without having to explain all of it. So you have to find a way to do that. But again, that section might be a longer section in your abstract. So the other sections might have to be shorter. So you may have to sacrifice some space for that so that a reader of your abstract will have the best idea of your work. So that would be my sort of summary answer, but let's take a look at your particular piece that you're working on and figure out how we can maybe summarize it in a way that the abstract version is not taking up the entire 200 words of the abstract. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah,
Thank you.
You're welcome. See, do you have your hand up as well?
Yeah, you have mentioned about the word count. So may I know what is the length for the manuscript abstract and the conference abstract?
It depends, Siti. There really isn't, it depends on the discipline and whoever decides on the length. In general, most abstracts for scientific journals for manuscripts tend to be around 250 words. Sometimes even less than that, but 250 is a good. So it really, you have to check your journal you want to submit your work to. They will tell you how long your abstract should and can be. Conference abstracts sometimes can be a little longer. They can be up to 500 words. I have even seen conferences in my field in education, for example, where a conference abstract has to be 1,000 words. I'm like, wow, that's like almost a bit of a paper, because our papers tend to be longer, right? In those fields than necessarily a scientific paper. So it really depends on the discipline and on the context. But I want to say that conference abstracts tend to be a little bit longer than your manuscript abstracts, because the manuscript abstracts are only very short and small. I can turn my camera back on again because I'm doing some hand movements here. They're really, they have limited space because they have to be printed in a journal, right? They don't want to take up too much space. Whereas for conference abstracts, those are usually just online. The length can be, and you also kind of want to give writers a little bit more space to explore their ideas because they tend to be often more at the exploratory stage. So that's my short answer. And ultimately it depends on, whoever is asking you for an abstract, they will tell you exactly what they want. And if they don't, you need to ask them because there's such a variety. But average, what I see for abstracts for manuscripts is around 250 words. Henry, do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, is that an accurate assessment? I think 250, 300 maybe. Sometimes I see 150, which is like nothing, I feel, but that's possible as well.
Yeah, that's a general range, 250 to 300.
Yeah.
150 is rather short.
Yes. So it's a rare. I've seen it, but it's not the norm. The norm is around 250 to 300 for manuscripts. Sure, you're welcome, Siti. My pleasure. All right, I want to just briefly talk about these 5 editing principles, and we won't be able to go into detail, but as we go through them the next few months in great detail for an hour each, just want you to be aware of those because they can really help you also with, hold on one second, my kid was stuck here in a thing. He's going into the cat stuff. Anyway, long story short, avoiding excessive nominalizations, and nominalizations, I'll explain what they are. They're basically like, rather than saying, I examine, or we examined this this phenomenon, is saying the examination of this phenomenon. You make a noun out of it. You nominalize a verb. Like rather than saying we examined, it's like the examination of, and it creates a more abstract moment for your reader, and you want to avoid that as much as possible. So that happens a lot in abstracts sometimes as well, in manuscript abstracts. And it actually, by using verbs, you can all of these can help you shorten your writing. Not necessarily always, but in many cases. That's why I included them in here. Focusing on strong verbs with clear actors. So really focusing on who is doing what rather than being very abstract in the abstract, no pun intended. There's a reason, I guess, why it's called abstract. Sentence length, keep it short as much as you can, even in abstract. Use active voice as much as possible, and organize your text. And by organize your text for the abstract, it really is making sure you follow the structure of your of the articles. You don't start suddenly talking about the result, the implications before the results and so on. So those are fine, and we'll look at these in a larger context for manuscript and scientific writing in general in each of our workshops, but those can be also very useful for cutting down some words. So if you want to go through the slides on your own time, there's a bunch of slides coming after this for each of those principles, some examples. Feel free to take a look at them. If you have questions, send me an email. I'll be happy to either meet with you one-on-one if you're really interested, like, oh my God, I want to know what this means. No problem. But we will go over these in greater detail. There's a workshop dedicated to almost each of them, or a much longer than I would do in another 20 minutes or so that I usually do it for a workshop like this. But just be aware of these, that they can be very useful in reducing sentence length, which is the key. If you're at like 280 words and you have to be at 250, what do you do? And you're like, I can't take anything out content-wise. You probably can, but it's hard to do that. I get that. I think it gets to your question. Who was asking the question about the length? CT, I think she's gone. About sort of like, oh my God, was it you, Nita? I think it was Nita. About like I have this complex methodology. How do I put it in, this short version of an abstract? You might be surprised at what your readers will only need, rather what you think they need to understand the context of your work. But that's hard, right? Especially for you who are in the middle of this work and like every little thing is important. I get that. So it's that stepping away that can be challenging. And that's what we all are here for, to help you with as well, to give you feedback on your work. All right. Any other questions, thoughts, comments on abstracts and titles?
I just want to thank Isabel for a wonderful presentation.